In this presentation, we'll be looking over Jean Piaget's stages of development. So things that we'll look over will be his educational background, some key ideas and definitions, the 4 stages of development, and how to apply each theory in the classroom, some criticism he faced, and conclusion. So his education and work, he obtained his doctorate in zoology and philosophy in 1918, and then later he became interested in epistemology and was employed by the Binet Institution, where he worked in administering reading tests to children. While he was doing that, he was intrigued with the errors in the reasoning process as to why the children got the answers wrong. Later, he conducted a study on his 3 children through a more natural observation, as well as some older children that weren't his. In 1921, he published his findings, and 1929, he became the professor of child psychology at the University of Neuchâtel. So some key ideas. Stages may be passed at different paces but never skipped over. And a child's development is influenced by their environment, so they learn by their actions and interacting with the world around them. Each stage involves a unique type of intelligence. Some key definitions. Schemas are a set of actions that lead to operations. Assimilation is when you approach new information or situations and use your pre-existing understanding of the world to interpret it. Accommodation is when you take what you already know and you accommodate it according to new situations, such as if you're tasked to introduce yourself to a 10-year-old compared to at a job interview. And equilibrium is applying the process of accommodation and assimilation to balance new and existing knowledge. So the different stages of child development are sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and lastly, formal operational. So the first stage is the sensory motor stage from birth to 24 months. So up until 8 months, infants lack object permanence, and they're born with a small number of schemas, which is sucking, grasping, head turning, and visual tracking. So they learn the world around them by using their senses. By 8 to 24 months, however, object permanence and memory start to develop, so peekaboo doesn't work on them anymore. They start to experiment by getting attention from caregivers. Increased physical mobility and cognitive development start to happen, and this marks the beginning of symbolic abilities through language, which means that they start to realize that words have meaning behind them. So for teachers and caregivers, they can provide different materials and environments to toddlers and infants to discover, such as a rattle, blanket, rubber duck, crawling pen, and during the end of this stage, children recognize shapes and colors, so you can give them sorting blocks and stacking toys. You can put them in a ball pit or a bouncing chair, and this is perfect for entertaining them and also keeping their developing minds engaged. So the second stage is the pre-operational stage from 2 to 7 years. So during this time, their mind is full of imagination and creativity, while their language and memory mature and develop, and they have an egocentric interpretation of the world. However, they still have difficulty in classifying an object in 2 or more categories, in understanding cause and effect, and comparison. So some activities that they can do with their parents or in schools as well is they can role play, they can play taste and smell games, play with new material that change shape, such as clay or sand, story time, and use toys to introduce math and like adding, subtracting, division, and so on. Educational activities for the classroom, they can start exploring the parts of a flower and how the stem works. They can grow a bean plant, explore the sounds animals make, weighing different objects in a room, and coloring and labeling a butterfly life cycle diagram. The third stage is the concrete operational stage, which takes place from 7 to 11 years. This is when children start to develop a more logical and concrete reasoning. However, this means that a child may become overwhelmed when asked to reason a hypothetical or abstract problem because they're still thinking about everything by what they see and their hear and experience. However, they start to develop a more allocentric thinking and are aware of external events happening around them. Some ideas and activities that educators may include in their lesson include activities with chemical reactions, such as creating slime with borax and glue, and making a volcano with vinegar and baking soda, measuring fluid from different containers, comparing the difference between chemical and physical reactions, as well as mammals and reptiles. The last stage is the formal operational stage, which is from 11 years and up. Although not all children may reach this stage, the children who do start to understand scientific reasoning. They start to use symbols related to abstract concepts, such as in algebra and science. They start to think systematically, understand politics, ponder relationships, justice, and they can start to come up with conclusions to hypothetical problems. So during this stage, in classrooms, they can start to make jewelry by measuring how much materials they would need. They can do sentence arranging and jumble. They can participate in virtual science labs, finding synonyms or antonyms to emotions and words. And later on in high school, they can start creating arguments or defend ideas by using research for relevant topics such as, is technology useful or a distraction? So when introducing new material in the classroom, Piaget states that it's important to evaluate the stage of development the child is in. And once you do, you have to incorporate differentiated teaching. The best way kids learn is by doing. So learning to solve problems must be discovered rather than taught. And the process of learning is just as important as the end result. So some criticism that he faced was because of the extent of his research. So he observed only a small sample of children who came from a more privileged background. He did not clearly define his variables. This is a more important thing that they criticized, because the experiment cannot be replicated. Therefore, it's invalid. His theory, however, differs from others because he focused his research on children, and he was more interested in investigating the development of fundamental concepts rather than the end result of specific behaviors. So in conclusion, Piaget identified that children pass through different developmental stages and see the world differently compared to adults. In a quote, he states, "The best way to understand them is to see it from their point of view." He also states a child must master one stage before moving on, and each stage can be passed at different times, and at the very end, a child's environment influences their development. Here's the list of references that I used. Thank you so much for your time, and this concludes the presentation.